The Chinese detentions of Canadians Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig have been ongoing for over 2 years now, following the Vancouver arrest of Huawei tech executive Meng Wanzhou in 2018. However, this case is just one of the most high-profile cases of many global hostage-taking situations that Canadians have been involved in. A new joint publication between the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and the Canadian Coalition Against Terror claims that it might be time for Canada to step up, with MLI senior fellow Sarah Teich proposing legislation to counter global hostage-taking and hostage diplomacy. In this report, Ms. Teich highlights shortfalls in the Canadian justice system and divides this proposed legislation into three parts: sanctions, support for families, and multilateral cooperation. To tell us more on these proposed legislations, we are joined by Ms. Sarah Teich from MLI. Welcome to the show, ma'am.
Thanks, Nima.
So for our viewers, can you quickly describe what global hostage-taking and hostage diplomacy is, and what usually happens to the Canadians who are taken hostage?
Sure. Hostage-taking is basically the seizure or detention of a person with the hostage taker saying, do X and we will release the hostage. That can also be implicit as opposed to explicit. And when states take hostages instead of gangs or terrorist groups, that's what's popularly called hostage diplomacy. And that's what's happening with China and Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor.
Now, as mentioned, please continue, ma'am.
Sorry, you carry on.
Now, as mentioned, the detentions of the two Michaels by China is not the first time that Canadians have been the victims of hostage diplomacy. So in their case and in others, how has Canada handled these incidents in terms of efforts to return our citizens?
The tools are limited in terms of law and policy. In terms of law, Canada ratified the UN Hostages Convention in 1985 and subsequently amended the criminal code. But beyond consular officials doing their best, that's really it. Some indirect tools are sanctions, which are blunt instruments and not specific ones. And there was an expose in the Toronto Star a few years ago, which found that Canadian government doesn't have a policy when it comes to hostage situations. They respond to each new situation on the fly. The expose also revealed that communications with the families of hostages is completely hit or miss, with RCMP officers responsible for this communication either going above or beyond or brushing them off. So that's highly problematic. I will say governments have generally been consistent to not pay ransoms or cave to political concessions, so that's very positive. We could have released Meng, who's the subject of lawful extradition proceedings to the U.S. in the hopes that the CCP would reciprocate with the two Michaels, but that would constitute a political concession as well as an inappropriate intrusion into the independence of the judiciary, and that would really just encourage further hostage-taking as well.
Now, ma'am, we've got a little over 2 minutes now. Let's get into this proposed legislation. What are these three proposed actions in this document, and how should they be facilitated?
So the three parts are sanctions, support for families, and cooperation with allies. The first part is what contains the sanctions mechanism. So rather than relying on the general sanctions mechanisms that Canada presently has, which may seem to some like a poor fit for the circumstances, this legislation would create a dedicated sanctions mechanism to use against both foreign states and foreign nationals that engage in hostage-taking. The second part would provide a framework for the communication with families, and it would impose a number of obligations on the government to that effect. It would obligate the Canadian government to consistently and reliably communicate with families, direct them to appropriate resources, including mental health support, and offer them assistance in acquiring any information. And the third part provides a framework for cooperation with other countries, and this recognizes that this is really a global problem that requires global collaboration and the cultivation of local support.
And considering that this is a global problem, how does Canada's current stance on hostage diplomacy speak towards our global reputation as a world power?
You know, I think Canada has more power and prestige than we often give ourselves credit for. So hostage-taking is a problem worldwide, and no country that I've looked at least has legislation like this. So this is a growing global problem that we're all still figuring out how to deal with. And this really provides Canada with an opportunity to be a leader and an example in this regard.
And we've got a little over a minute left, ma'am. What are the next steps for MLI in terms of this legislation? Have you gotten any response from government officials regarding this?
We've gotten some positive feedback. I think that's all that's appropriate for me to say for right now. The next steps would be to just push it forward. Hopefully it becomes a bill to be debated. We have included a first draft of the legislation, so that makes it easier for Ottawa to just copy and paste this into a bill to be debated, essentially.
All right, Ms. Sarah Teich from MLI, again, thank you so much for your time today, ma'am.
Thank you.